Good afternoon. Welcome to this live broadcast of the Charter Commission. My name is Peter Ginder. I'm the chair of the Charter Commission. Before we begin this meeting, I want to offer a friendly reminder to all members, staff, and the public that these meetings are broadcast live to enable greater public participation. These broadcasts include real-time captioning as a further method to increase the accessibility of our proceedings to the community. Therefore, all speakers need to be mindful of the rate of their speech so that our captioners can fully capture and transcribe all comments for the broadcast. We ask all speakers to moderate the speed and clarity of their comments. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we can verify a quorum for this meeting.
Commissioner DeMello is absent. Holquist?
Here.
Nye?
Present.
Schneider?
Here.
Rubenstein?
Here.
Prindle? Here. Doherty?
Here.
Boone?
Here.
Clegg?
Here.
Garcia?
Present.
Smith?
Here.
Cooper? Here. Perry?
Here.
Kozak?
Here.
And Ginder.
Here.
We have 14 present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Clegg.
Is there a second?
Second. Nye.
We have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion on the motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Our next item of business is acceptance of the meetings from our December meeting. May I please have a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved, Rubenstein.
Is there a second?
Second. Perry.
Okay. We have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion on the motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That motion passes and the minutes are accepted. The next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I have two items on that regard. First, we have a new commissioner joining with us for the first time, Commissioner Eric Prindle. So I'll ask Commissioner Prindle just to take a moment to introduce himself and why he decided to apply for this position.
Thank you. Yes. So my name is Eric Prindle. I live in South Uptown with my partner and two kids. I am a licensed attorney, but actually I've spent the majority of my career in marketing and marketing operations. I also have a background in nonprofit governance. I had the privilege of serving for 5 years on the board of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra Society. And I applied for a position on the Charter Commission. I was looking for opportunities to get involved. This seemed to align with my talents and experience. I am someone who has an eye for governance and systems and processes, and this seemed like it aligned with that. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to serve, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Commissioner, and welcome. The next item that I have as far as the chair's report is, you will recall, after our December meeting, we received a letter from the president of the Minneapolis Park Board expressing some concern about the report that they'd received vis-a-vis the city council and the independence of the park board. And those of you who follow the Minneapolis Park Board know that they jealously guard their independence, and they were concerned that we were in some fashion looking at park board structure. I did have a lengthy conversation with the park board president and did assure her that we were looking more at a span of control issue for the city council, and that we were not undertaking any review of the park board. So I just wanted to just note that I did follow up on that letter from the park board. The next item on our agenda is the election of officers for 2026, and I will now hand the meeting off to the clerk for the purpose of the elections.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginder. I am the clerk for the Charter Commission, Michael Altagrima, and I will be handling the election of officers for this body. In terms of procedure, I will administer the elections by first opening it up for president, then vice president, and then secretary. For each election, we will begin by nominations. After all nominations are made for that office, we will proceed to take a vote by roll call in the order that the nominations were made. Are there any questions from commissioners about the process at this time? Seeing none, I will proceed with the first office, which would be president. Without objection, I will now open the floor for nominations. Are there any nominations? Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you. I enthusiastically nominate Peter Ginder to continue as chair of the Charter Commission. I base my nomination on my great experience working with him.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. Are there any other nominations for the office of president? Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I will close the period for nominating for that office. We will now proceed to a vote to elect Commissioner Ginder, and I'll proceed to do that roll call. Well, I guess, Commissioner Ginder, do you accept the nomination? I don't believe I heard anything. My apologies.
I do.
Perfect. Commissioner Hultquist,
Yes?
on the nomination, yes.
Okay.
Nye,
Aye.
Schneider,
Aye.
Rubenstein,
Aye.
Prindle,
Aye.
Doherty,
Yes.
Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Garcia,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Cooper,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
and Ginder.
Aye.
We have 14 ayes. Congratulations to Chair Ginder. Our next office will be the office of Vice President. Without objection, I will open the floor for nominations. Are there any nominations at this time? Commissioner Kozak.
I nominate Commissioner Rubenstein.
We have a nomination by Kozak. Commissioner Rubenstein, do you accept that nomination?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for the office of Vice President? Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I will close the period for nominations, and we'll now proceed to that vote on the motion to elect Commissioner Rubenstein as Vice President. Commissioner Hultquist?
Aye.
Nye?
Aye.
Schneider?
Aye.
Rubenstein?
Aye.
Prindle?
Aye.
Doherty?
Aye.
Boone?
Aye.
Clegg?
Aye.
Garcia?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Cooper?
Aye.
Perry?
Aye.
Kozak?
Aye.
Ginder?
Aye.
We have 14 ayes. Congratulations to Vice President Rubenstein. We will next move on to the election of Secretary. I will now open the floor for nominations. Are there any nominations by commissioners?
Yes, I would like to nominate Commissioner Garcia, who I think has done a terrific job in the past as part of the leadership team, and I think she'll do a great job going forward.
All right, we have a nomination. Are there any other nominations by commissioners? Are there any other nominations? Commissioner Garcia, do you accept that nomination?
I do, thank you.
Awesome. On the motion to nominate Garcia, Commissioner Hultquist,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Schneider,
Aye.
Rubenstein,
Aye.
Prindle,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Garcia,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Cooper,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Ginder.
Aye.
We have 14 ayes. With that, Chair Ginder, we have completed elections. I'll hand the chair back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Waldigo. And thank you for the election. I think, I know last year I had put forward a plan for the coming year. I think our plan this year is going to be very similar. We have a number of items to complete from last year's plan, which included looking at the city council makeup, and we're continuing with that with the report tonight. Looking at department heads, which we've made a lot of progress on, but continue moving forward with that, as well as other tactical amendments that we need to continue to look at during this coming year. But thank you again for allowing me to be the chair of this commission. The next item on our agenda is number 7, which is the, number 6, which is the annual report, which is the approval of the report and directing the city clerk to forward to the chief judge of the Hennepin County District Court. That report summarizes the work of the commission in 2025. Are there any questions or is there any discussion by members on the report? Commissioner Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 4, Appendix B, I just want to make sure that Commissioner Cooper is well represented on the document. I'm not sure if he was going to bring this up, but I'm referenced twice, although I'd love to be in 2 places at once. I'm seat 3, not seat 12. So I would like the document that we submit to the chief judge to reflect seat 12 as Commissioner Cooper, not Commissioner Nye, please.
I think that's appropriate, and I noticed that we also have incorrect contact information with regard to Commissioner Cooper. So subject to those corrections, before the clerk forwards it to the city clerk's office, I think we would be ready to move forward, unless there are any other errors or omissions that anybody else has seen in the report. Okay.
Move the report.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second, Nye.
Okay. We have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion on that motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those Those opposed say nay. That motion passes and the report is adopted. The next item is number 7, is comparable research. It's a presentation related to the research on municipal councils in select jurisdictions. If you recall, we received a presentation in December by City Clerk Carl. We are today joined by Guidehouse. I'll invite Mr. Carl to get us started and introduce our guests.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to introduce 3 of our consultants from Guidehouse who are here today, and I'll bring them on up so that they can get started. Hopefully you all have a printed copy of their supplemental report at your desk. They'll be going over that to address not only their original findings, but especially the follow-up questions asked by this body, which they have addressed in their supplemental report. So I'll turn it over to our friends from Guidehouse.
Good afternoon. Chair Ginder, Vice Chair Rubenstein, Secretary Garcia, members of the Charter Commission, and meeting attendees. My name is Margaret Schaus, and today I will be presenting Guidehouse's research on how Minneapolis's City Council and Legislative Department are structured, resourced, and governed, compared to 11 peer cities. First, I want to thank the Charter Commission for the opportunity to share this work as part of your agenda today. And I also want to thank the Office of the City Clerk for their sponsorship of this research. I'm a director in the state and local government practice at Guidehouse, a professional services firm that delivers advisory, technology, and managed services to both commercial and government clients. I'm joined today by 2 of my colleagues, Christy Thronson and Stephen Jackson, who contributed to this work. The team's role was to assess comparable jurisdictions data across cities, synthesize patterns, and present objective findings to this commission. As an overview of my briefing, I will lay out the process, purpose, context, and key research questions for this work. I'll provide key details of our analysis, highlighting areas where Minneapolis is aligned with comparator cities and where it is structurally distinct. I'll summarize our key findings and highlight our next steps. And certainly, I'll invite your questions at the end, but if questions arise in the course of my briefing, please feel free to raise them. To frame this discussion, I'll first lay out our objective scope and methodology for this work. Our research objective was to compare the structure and function of Minneapolis's City Council and legislative departments to 11 peer cities, which I'll cover on the next slide. But I do want to clarify up front that this analysis does not assess the relative effectiveness of the various structures that we identified. This work instead serves to identify comparative points of interest, which may merit further analysis to determine the applicability to Minneapolis's context. Our research focused on 4 key areas. First, council size and representation. Specifically, we examined the 12 city councils in our sample to identify key characteristics, including size. who they represent, and how council members are elected. Second, we looked at committees and process. Specifically, we examined the underlying standing committees and how those are organized and configured. Third, we looked at mayor-council relationships. Here we reviewed the appointment and confirmation process for department heads to identify roles and responsibilities between mayors and councils and where they differed across our sample cities. In addition, we looked at common challenges identified in strong mayor-council relationships and highlight several strategies for addressing them. And then fourth, staffing and legislative support. Here we delved into council's legislative departments to look at staffing levels and capabilities across the peer cities. To answer these research questions, Guidehouse reviewed city charters and city codes, analyzed FY 2025 budget documents, conducted interviews with staff of 6 of our comparator cities, and supplemented findings with desktop research. We conducted this work from June through August 2025, and the data available are as of August 2025. Moving on to our 11 comparator cities and how we chose them, we began by focusing on cities that closely resemble Minneapolis in terms of population, economic output, and budgetary scale. We then further refined that selection by applying the criteria outlined in the left-hand column. Specifically, we considered cities that have been referenced in other peer benchmarking reports with Minneapolis, that operate under a strong mayor-council form of government, that maintain a full-time council, that feature both at-large and district-based representation models, and have made recent changes to their council structures. Only cities meeting at least 4 of those 5 criteria were included in our final list, and you see the table on the right illustrates the 11 comparator cities that satisfied these requirements. It's important to note that the objective of our benchmarking exercise is not to prescribe a single model for Minneapolis to follow, but instead to present the gamut of models and practices that exist across the peer cities and to identify where Minneapolis aligns with its peers, where it stands out, and where there is significant variation across all cities without a clear leading practice. Moving on to council size and representation, the table on the left summarizes key characteristics for Minneapolis and our comparator cities with respect to the number of council members, whether they serve as at-large or district representatives or a mix, the year that the city established the council size and representation approach shown, and whether residents vote for council members via general election or ranked choice. We identified that the number of council members in Minneapolis is in line with its peer average of 12 members. Notably, when we reviewed representation as a ratio of its population, we observed that Minneapolis has a relatively larger council size, with 32,701 residents per council member, shown in the bar chart on the right. By comparison, the average across all peers is 63,108 residents per council member. We found only Buffalo has fewer residents per council seat, whereas at the other end of the spectrum, the 3 cities at the top of this chart represent more than 2 to 4 times as many residents as per council member as does Minneapolis. Now, with respect to representation and election types, we identified 2 models used by cities in each of these categories, for which Minneapolis's approach is in line with its peers. Specifically, the cities in our sample were split in using either all district or a mix of district and at-large systems, as well as using either a general election model or a ranked choice model. None of the comparator cities used a purely at-large council model. In fact, comparator cities that have shifted away in recent years from at-large to mixed or district council structures have reported positive overall outcomes with respect to improvements in equity and neighborhood-level representation. We further noted that Minneapolis and Kansas City have the longest standing approach to council size and representation time, compared to Columbus and Portland, who have made the most recent changes, with Columbus in 2023 increasing from 7 to 9 council members and adopting a new form of district representation whereby candidates must represent a district but are still elected citywide. And last year, Portland changed their election model to a multi-winner ranked choice approach. And then finally, we observed that most cities in our sample elect their council members through a general election, while 4 cities, Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., use a ranked choice voting approach. Now, our evaluation of council standing committees focused on several key dimensions, including the number of committees, their average membership, and the meeting frequency. These findings are represented in the table on the left. And notably, the number of standing committees varies significantly across cities. You can see that Boston has as many as 21 standing committees, while Kansas City has only 3. Columbus recently halved their number of standing committees from 21 to 11. Despite this range, Minneapolis's committee types, sizes, and meeting frequency are comparable to the majority of peer cities. For example, on average, cities in our sample maintain 8 standing committees, which is slightly more than Minneapolis's 6, but overall consistent. The average committee size across comparator cities is 5 council members, aligning closely with Minneapolis's average of 6 members per committee. In addition to these quantitative measures, we examined the policy scope of Minneapolis's 6 standing committees and compared peer cities against this model. Our analysis found that Minneapolis's committee policy scope closely matches that of its peers. The most notable differences lie in how cities name and organize their committees, which in turn affects how they assign jurisdictional oversight to each of those policy areas. For instance, all cities in our sample address the policy scope covered by Minneapolis's Standing Committee on Business, Housing, and Zoning, but we found that many distribute this scope across 2 or more standing committees. The similarities and differences across standing committees are represented in the table on the right, and I'll take a moment to walk you through it. So the top row, shaded in gray, lists the policy focus areas of each of Minneapolis's 6 standing committees. And then the rows below compare the structure and oversight of these policy areas in peer cities. So for example, the green circles indicate that a peer city has a standing committee with the same policy scope as Minneapolis. Using the budget column, third column, as an example, each of the cities with a green circle also have a standing budget committee. The yellow circles denote policy areas that are also addressed by peer cities, but within different committee structures. So looking at the budget column again as an example, Washington, D.C. was yellow because it doesn't have a dedicated budget committee. Instead, they address budget matters within the jurisdiction of their other standing committees. And when they seek to address overall cross-cutting budget issues, they do so in their committee of the whole. And then finally, the gray circles indicate policy areas that are not addressed by peer city standing committees. So for example, under budget, Seattle is gray, and that was a function of their budget matters are addressed via a select committee rather than a standing committee. Now, through the course of this research, we also gathered qualitative feedback in interviews on challenges within mayor-council relationships and anecdotal ways to lessen them. Across our interviews, several common challenges emerged, and I suspect none of them will surprise you. First, with busy calendars and different priorities driving those respective calendars, cities noted challenges with advancing approvals and decisions on issues where mayor-council priorities are not aligned especially. We also heard that communication breakdowns between branches were also reported, often due to interpersonal styles and lack of communication. And then a third theme was that structural tensions between policymaking and execution, especially where interviewees found ambiguity in roles and responsibilities, created friction in daily operations. Some cities we spoke with have adopted formal mechanisms to mitigate friction, which we note on the right side. For example, Denver holds standing meetings between mayoral and council leadership to ensure routine and consistent communications. The Portland City Code mandates coordination between the city clerk and a policy liaison in the council president's office to facilitate open and ongoing communications. And in Washington, D.C., in their code, they use automatic confirmation timelines to ensure that mayoral appointments move forward automatically after 90 days to avoid delays caused by inaction. Continuing on this theme, we assess mayor-council relationships through the lens of how city mayors and councils appoint and confirm department heads, as shown on this table. Overall, we observed a spectrum of engagement by city councils. In Denver, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., like Minneapolis, those cities are structured so that the mayor appoints all department heads and the council confirms each of those positions. Milwaukee, Buffalo, Portland, and San Diego fall in the middle, where the mayor or a city administrator appointed by the mayor appoints department heads, and the city council confirms a subset of those appointees. On the other end of the spectrum, we found Kansas City, Boston, and Columbus, where the mayor or a mayor-appointed city manager appoints department heads without council confirmation of those positions. This wide variation in appointment and confirmation processes highlights the distinct trade-offs each city faces. These include balancing accountability and efficiency, as well as achieving administrative clarity. A few other findings from our peer cities. Columbus has charter language that explicitly gives the mayor unilateral appointment and removal power over department heads without council confirmation. And while I noted previously that cities like DC use automatic confirmation timelines to avoid delays to confirmation, on the other end of the spectrum, Atlanta's charter does not allow silent confirmation of mayoral appointees if a vote is delayed. Our final area of analysis assessed the legislative departments across our sample cities, including the staffing levels and capabilities that support city councils. A number of cities we spoke with cited high staffing needs as a challenge, with legislative staff often juggling multiple roles and responsibilities. As shown in the table on the left, council staffing levels vary widely across comparator cities, ranging from 1 staff member per council member in Kansas City and Milwaukee to as many as 12 or 13 in San Diego and Washington, D.C., respectively. On average, we found comparator cities have 4 dedicated staff per member, which is slightly higher but in line with Minneapolis's range of 2 to 3. Cities we found were also largely consistent in giving flexibility to council members to hire their own staff within varying budget levels. We also found that while no 2 comparator cities structure their legislative and council support teams in the same way, most cities have similar teams and functions. Most cities, for example, have some sort of centralized administrative support office for council, but vary in range and scope of services and organizational placement of those positions. Also, most comparator cities distribute these functions across multiple offices or rely more heavily on mayoral staff. We further observed that there is broad consistency across the capabilities of the staff supporting them, shown on the table on the right. Across all cities, legislative analysis and support was the most common job function, and we also observed the range of business support functions across many cities, such as budget, communications, IT, and cross-government support. Now, this slide provides a final summary, reiterating our main findings that tie back to our 4 key research areas I introduced at the beginning. With respect to council size and representation, Minneapolis is largely in line with its peers. One area of differentiation is Minneapolis's larger council size when compared to its population. With respect to committees and process, Minneapolis's committee types, size, and meeting frequency are comparable to the average of its peers. With respect to mayor-council relationships, we did not identify a common or consistent model or set of leading practices across our sample. And with respect to staffing and legislative support, we found Minneapolis to be consistent with the average of its peers in both the size of council staff and the capabilities those legislative staff performed. Our next steps are to conclude our analysis, and we will incorporate that work into our final report for delivery to the city. This concludes my briefing on our comparable jurisdictions research. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this work to you today. And with that, I'll pause, and my colleagues and I welcome any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaws, for that presentation. Are there any questions or discussion from commission members? Commissioner Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that presentation. One question I had was just about the election style of the different cities that you viewed. So this commission may be looking at even years versus odd years versus and changing how we may do our council and mayoral elections in the future. Did you the cities that you looked at, when do they hold city council and mayoral elections? Are they even years? Are they odd years? Are they a mix of both? Was that part of the research that you did?
Thank you for that question. That was not in scope of this research, but in delivering our final report, we'd be happy to add that analysis to our final report.
I don't know if I have the authority to say yes, but I know I would find it helpful.
Commissioner, I think we're all interested in that, so I would ask that if you could include that in the supplemental report. As Commissioner Nye indicated, we're looking at that heavily because of the impacts on turnout, and there are a number of issues with even year versus odd year, and it's been on our agenda, so we would appreciate if you could add that to it also.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there other questions? Commissioner Rubenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that cities that have, I think as I heard you correctly, that cities that have shifted away from at-large members of city council have been sort of positive in their description of the results. And I wondered if you could just speak a little more to those factors.
Yes, absolutely. That is a great question. Thank you. We found both in our interviews and certainly in our research that the opportunity to provide more district-level representation increased the likelihood that members were able to equally represent the breadth of perspectives of their constituents. Let me see if my colleague would like to add to that.
Yeah, I'll also add that I think from a few cities that we spoke to that used the mixed model that had both district and at-large, noted that there was often a positive balance between, or there can be both a positive balance between district-level members being kind of more focused on those district-level issues, being well-balanced with the at-large members who can take a holistic view of the city and focus on more of those citywide issues. And with that balance, a lot of folks noted the positive effects of that, but did also note that can also create some tensions as well between some of those more district-level focused members and more of those citywide focused members. So pros and cons to this style, but overwhelmingly positive of folks moving to this mixed or district-level system.
If I can just do a quick follow-up on that. In the cities that have moved away, have they moved away completely from the at-large, or have they reduced at-large? And which cities in particular did that out of this list?
Sure. I think I'll have to check my notes just to make sure I have the specific list of cities right that have all moved away. But for those cities, they've mostly moved to sometimes that mixed level, where they haven't totally moved away from all at large or all to district level, but more of a balance of often we'll have. I think Kansas City has an equal amount of 6 at-large, 6 mixed. Most other cities we've seen have more district-level representatives and then a fewer amount of at-large representatives. And like I said, I'll check back at my notes and see if I can pull up that specific list.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Can I have a follow-up on that as well?
Yes.
So one of the cons with regard to the at-large, which we've all talked about here, is the lack of representation of minorities in certain districts. Was that I guess I have 2 follow-ups. That's my first one. Was that an issue that you looked at all? Because that seems to be an issue here that is of significant importance.
I'll share that observation you made. It certainly came up in our research and in our conversations, where I think that was one of the primary reasons why those who shifted from a purely at-large model to either a mixed or a district model identified that there were improvements in being able to more equally represent those underrepresented residents.
And then my second question along those lines is in speaking, because we have at-large members in our park board, and in speaking to some of those at-large members, one of the things that they mentioned is they do not get anywhere near the constituent back and forth that district representatives do, because if something's going on, people call their district representatives instead of looking to at-large. Was that anything you looked at all in terms of constituent interactions?
We did not focus on this scope as much of the particular constituent representation and looking at kind of those constituent interactions, but can I'll defer to the team to see if we can follow up on that in the following supplementary report.
But I think your takeaway was certainly reflected in our research and the conversations we had where, you know, as my colleague noted, having that mix of at-large and district was able to address exactly that tension you mentioned, where, you know, for those issues that are unique to districts, district representatives are more able to voice those unique concerns, and where there are perhaps more cross-cutting issues that affect the whole of a city or municipality, having that balance of at-large to take that broader look and position on behalf of the entire municipality was also beneficial.
But that's exactly what they said didn't happen, was that the constituents, when looking at citywide issues, still went only to their district representatives and didn't communicate with that there was a significant lack of communication with at-large members on all issues, both citywide as well as those involving their specific districts.
Thank you for clarifying that. That did come up as a point of feedback, that depending on how that at-large position is represented, that there is sometimes the risk that at-large position can almost serve as an extension of a district if the individual representing that at-large position is more aligned with district interests. So I would likely defer back to some of our research that found some of the more personality-based challenges that would need to be addressed, and whether there are any kind of internal controls to help make sure that the intended balance of representation is achieved.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
One more question.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you. I also would be interested to know if there's any focus on people who wish to run for at-large seats. One of the issues that we've heard raised is that it limits the ability of people who don't have the means to run for a citywide seat. So it excludes people who might otherwise be able to run for office.
That is an interesting perspective. It did not come up in the scope of our research, but I can, yes, thank you.
Commissioner Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on, this is sort of following the just the conversation that we've been having on page 3 of the report that you provided, talking about council size and representation as, from the executive summary for key takeaways for the city of Minneapolis to include for anyone who wants to follow along. Talking about district representation, you write, district representation is typically seen to improve citizen participation and increase diversity and equity. What do you mean by citizen participation here, and does that include voter turnout?
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. I think in terms of the citizen participation and diversity and equity, I think we've seen that there can, as noted, sometimes be more, as we were speaking to, if there's that district level representation, we've seen that folks are usually more kind of active with that district level piece. For example, there are some cities where they are, have spoken about how much they kind of love having an all-district council, for example, as kind of facing off of some of those historical issues that may have happened with segregation and things of that nature, and that district level representation really kind of leading to more improved citizen participation in terms of calling representatives, in terms of being more active in elections. However, we did not look as much at voter turnout in particular with this research.
Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the confirmation procedures that you looked at. Did your research in your interviews or in looking at like the materials from the Denver reorganization, did you come across any, feedback from those governments about the purpose that the city council saw in the confirmation process in terms of something different than a one-time confirmation vote versus ongoing accountability, that sort of thing?
Thank you for that question. One point of analysis that we are completing is actually delving into more detail on the process and the details of each of those confirmation and appointment structures. So we will take your question into account as we complete and finalize that research.
Commissioner Holmquist.
Thank you. I think that, for me, is the most important analysis that could come out of this report for, like, the immediate of right now. Will there be and this maybe is for the city clerk, is there going to be an opportunity for you to present that analysis to us at a later date? Because I think that analysis is what's at the heart of the question that we're trying to address right now.
I will certainly defer that question. We would be happy to share as requested.
So yes.
I see Mr. Carl nodding affirmatively that. Commissioner Schneider.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. There's a lot of information here. It's sort of hard to grasp, but I have kind of 2 or 3 little questions, and maybe you can answer them tonight, and if not, you can answer them later. I see that you interviewed 6 out of the 11, and I was just curious, like, were you planning to interview the other 5, or just if you could comment on that? I'll tell you all 3 questions, and then you could maybe comment on that. The question of peer cities, in my prior life, when I actually worked for the city, I did a lot of peer city research, and a lot of these are familiar to us. A lot of them are Federal Reserve Bank locations. A lot of them are sort of core, the key economic engine of that state, like we are. But some are not, and I'm just curious again, if you could say a little bit more about how you picked these cities. And then, I'm sorry, you have on different pages, how many counts or constituents per ward, and then you have on a different page, staff people per council member. And did you find any relationship? Do higher higher constituent per ward cities have more staff people per council member? Is there any relationship there? And finally, sorry for the, one of the issues that sort of, I think I brought it up last meeting, but something that this city has, and I do not know if other cities have, is a 311 function, where some years ago this city established this as a way to enhance constituent access to, it was sort of a complaint function. And I know that our 311 center, handles thousands of calls a year, and was designed to take the load off of council members. And so I'd be curious if how many of these cities have a sort of a similar, centralized constituent complaint system like a 311. So I'm sorry, that's several different questions. So.
Howard, thank you. Let me try to answer all of those. I can offer that our research scope did not cover looking at the 311 function and where that fell across sample cities that we looked at. To your question on peer cities and the criteria we used, certainly I mentioned that we first look at the broad factors of population, gross domestic product, and size of budget. And then understanding that the nature of this was to understand where there might be other models or practices that would be of interest to Minneapolis. We looked at other cities with either recent changes with similar strong mayor council structures, who again had been mentioned in other peer reports. To your observation that this is a data-rich report, one thing we want to do is be more inclusive of peer cities, so I will put that in quotes, because we didn't want to leave anything unshared that could potentially spark an area of interest or discussion in your discussions. Related to that, you asked about the number of peer cities that we interviewed. It truly was not for lack of interest. And in some ways, that was why we also were more inclusive. We wanted to see how many cities not only could we find strong objective data on, but also how many we could speak to fortify that research with anecdotal feedback. And so I think we just fell to the availability of time and the willingness of our peer cities to contribute to those interviews. And then you asked a great question about whether there was a relationship between the ratio of council staff to council members, as well as the, I believe, the budget and the
Constituents.
Yes, constituency per ward. I'm looking at my colleague in case that was readily available. If not, we'll follow up. You're amazing.
There is some correlation, although it's not. Of course. Thank you for the reminder. Hi, everybody. I'm Christy. Thank you for having us. So there is some correlation between the number of staff and the number of constituents represented. We do see the highest number of constituents represented in San Diego, and they have the highest number of staff with 7 to 12 staff members per council member. It's not, universal across the board. With Washington, D.C., they have quite a large staff size, generally speaking, but they represent about 50,000, 52,000 folks per council member. So some variation across the board.
Right. I'll just
Please.
observe here. I mean, Columbus, which is the second highest, has 2 staff persons per council. So that's a huge kind of variation between the top 2 cities in terms of constituents per council member. So I'm just curious about that, how they get on with that, so.
Yes,
100,000 people and 2 staff people, so.
Certainly. And I'll note that there are supporting legislative functions almost across the board. So there are some shared service models where when council offices need additional support with legislative drafting or analysis, they can pull from those staff to help them out and augment their dedicated staff members.
Oh, Commissioner Nye.
Just a quick follow-up. So I will say I worked for a state senator, and they represent about 75,000 people, and I was the only legislative staffer. And we certainly do rely on nonpartisan staff, on other folks to get the job done. But it was me answering phones and responding to constituents, and so 2 to 3 would have been super helpful. My question about staffing, and I don't mean to keep tagging on to folks, but how many is there a difference between full-time staff and part-time staff and what we would call, those of us who work at the legislature, like session-only folks who are there just for a period, or are these all full-time staffers?
I think they're primarily full-time staffers, but I'll have to get back to you on the exact breakdown of if we have session only included in those counts.
Yeah, I'll also say a lot of those folks who have the autonomy to hire full or part-time staff. And so we did hear from folks that sometimes they'll use their set budgets to hire 2 full-time staff. Sometimes they'll use that budget to hire 4 part-time staff. Sometimes they'll use that budget as a more seasonal hire when things are very busy in season. They'll hire some additional part-time staff just for that particular calendar month. And so we did see some variation in terms of part-time, full-time, and council members making that decision, which is why some of these numbers are 7 to 12 or 4 to 13 have that more large variation in the numbers.
Does this include interns and paid internships, or is it just what we would consider staff? I mean, interns are staff, don't get me wrong, but
I think we typically looked at staff and not internships, but yeah, we can kind of pull that out separately in the supplementary report.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any. Once again, I would like to thank you all for showing up and doing this work for us. I know that, excuse me, we're going to find it extremely helpful. And I know that we'll also look forward to the supplemental reports that you are going to prepare on some of the issues that have been raised previously. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And since we have no more discussion on this item, I'm going to ask the clerk to file this report, and I'm also, without objection, I'm going to refer this report to the Government Structure Committee to look at in regard to both our department head process as well as the outline in the structure of the City Council as we move forward on that issue. So I'm going to have that go to the Government Structure Committee. The next item on the agenda is even year municipal elections. And I know we were expecting a brief follow-up related to the question at our last meeting regarding any potential cost savings from aligning local elections with presidential elections. And I want to ask Mr. Carl to speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the commissioners. There was a question, as the chair outlined at the last meeting, where we did a presentation about city councils and different structures, about the costs that could potentially be saved by aligning municipal elections with even-yeared elections. You know currently that in Minneapolis we conduct our municipal elections in the odd-numbered year. And just to frame that up, I'll say in Minneapolis we have a 4-year cycle. So if we say that the presidential election, our biggest one, is year 1, the municipal election follows in year 2. Then there's the off-cycle or gubernatorial election in year 3, and in year 4, the 4th odd year cycle, we are not scheduled to have elections. That's an off year. In my 15 years here, we've had one off year. We end up having specials for some reason in that year. So in the 4-year cycle, the municipal election would be in year 2, following the presidential year. According to my staff, the costs that could be saved by moving the city's municipal election into an even-numbered year, either with the presidential or gubernatorial, are approximately $2.5 million. So I need to clarify for how the city's elections office budgets, because it is somewhat unique within the city. We have a standard budget, I'll call it our base budget, that pays for our staff, our equipment, the facilities, basically to keep that unit whole regardless of what year we're in the election cycle. So that's our base budget that pays for personnel, property, facilities, equipment, those types of matters. It stays roughly the same no matter what election cycle we're in, what year in that cycle. Then, in addition, each year we come forward and ask the mayor and council for a supplemental allocation to pay for the costs of the actual election. So for a presidential election, we know that's going to be our biggest impact, and we ask for an allocation for that based on an analysis of the previous 2 or 3 years presidential elections. So we try and keep very close to those costs. And we do that for the presidential, the municipal, and the gubernatorial. So our actual election costs can fluctuate each year. But for a municipal election, minus the costs of just the operations of the Elections and Voter Services Division, it's about $2.5 million for that election. So that is the potential cost savings we would achieve if municipal elections were moved into the even year cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Are there any questions for Mr. Carl? Commissioner Smith.
That 2.5 million, what percent of that is that of the total election budget? Over, say, this 4-year period?
Through the chair, Commissioner Smith, I'm sorry I don't have that data. I can certainly pull that together and email it to you all tomorrow. I just am not prepared to answer that off the top of my head. I will say that the cost of the municipal is the lowest of the 3 in a regular 4-year cycle, and so it's going to be much more compared to our base budget as a standard.
Any other questions for Mr. Carl? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess the question I would have is, should a decision be made to transition to even year, what would be the cost to transition? We'd be offsetting it potentially with this 2.5 million, but what would those costs look like?
Through the chair, Commissioner Boone, a good question, and I have a maybe partial answer to start and certainly can follow up with the other answers. There would be costs for a transition plan for the city to move to an even year election. The city of St. Paul is in the process of doing that now. Those would be, I would think, fairly minimal notices to voters, making sure that we have the spaces available. We might have to reallocate certain things and send additional mailers and notices to registered voters across the city. The other issue I think we'd have to look into, and I don't have great concern about this, but it is an issue for me as the election administrator, is when you have an election every year, you have an easier time to recruit the same group of election officials back. And so in Minneapolis, being the largest city and the votingest city and the votingest state, we are blessed to have a core seasonal team who come back year after year after year. And that includes both the seasonal staff who work with us for planning and preparing for each election, which starts in March before a November election. And then that ramps up to include our seasonal staff who work with us on absentee and early voting, which is going to start in about August. And then we ramp up, especially for Election Day, with all of our election judges covering all of the precincts and all of the districts across the city. So there is sort of a three-tiered system of staffing up for every election. And if there's an off year in between, people who depend upon that income as a salary could be offset with that. I think that's the most significant impact I would anticipate from not having a steady election every year.
Thank
you. And seeing no other questions, thank you, Mr. Carl. And
Absolutely.
I'll ask the clerk to file that report. The next item on our agenda is the elected official salaries. As you will recall, we received a letter from the mayor related to elected official salaries. My intent is to refer this item to the Amendment Review Committee for further discussion. But before I do so, are there any questions or discussions at this time?
Mr. Chair, just because they're here, I would be remiss not to also recognize Guidehouse. Guidehouse has done 2 of these studies for us over the last I guess 6 years. They did the original study, I believe it was in 2022 before the 2023 term began, to validate the salaries that the city pays to our mayor and city council in comparison to benchmark communities, many of which were also included in this study tonight. And then they did that again last year and repeated that to inform the decisions made by our policymakers about the salaries paid to mayor and council. So nice thank you again to Guidehouse for their partnership with us to provide a lot of factual information and analysis about how our elected officials are compensated in comparison to peer jurisdictions.
I would join in thanking Guidehouse on that, and I would note that the city council apparently took it seriously when they looked at elected official salaries for the coming cycle.
Correct. And Mr. Chair, with the Commission's indulgence, in case you aren't aware, based on that analysis, what we found was amongst peer jurisdictions, the mayor of Minneapolis was at the bottom of the scale for comparison cities by a significant amount. The council was just above the mid-range of that. And so the decision made by the council as part of last year's action to adopt the budget for the current year and for this 4-year term was to increase the mayor, to bring the mayor's salary in Minneapolis to the midpoint of the range of comparable cities, and to hold steady for the first 2 years of this 4-year term for the city council, by which time they'll be at about just under the midpoint, and then to provide an increase yet to be determined based on the average of all of the compensation given to the bargaining units, or I should say the recognized bargaining units within the city. And so that would be given in each of those years 3 and 4 in this term to the council members. So there is an adjustment significant to the mayor to provide parity with our mayors and comparable communities, and a smaller adjustment for the council to keep them at the midpoint during this term.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Carl, did Guidehouse or anyone look at whether or not any of our comparable peer cities are charter cities? And did we look at all, or could we look at all, in terms of who decides on, who has control over salaries? Is it the mayor and the council themselves, or is it the Charter Commission?
Through the chair, Commissioner Doherty, I don't have that information off the top of my head, and it was a different team, I believe, that helped us from Guidehouse. I will look into the report, and also happy to circulate the report that was shared in public with the council so that you have the benefit of that information, and see if I can answer those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Commissioner Smith.
I just wanted to confirm, if the Charter Commission were to take on the role of setting council and mayor salaries, that would require an actual change to the charter. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just for information, currently, the city council sets the salary, and that's done pursuant to a special law. And so a special law can be overridden by a charter amendment, and conversely, a charter can be overridden by a special law. You can get into a cycle if you wanted to. But so it's a it's a law that was passed, I believe, back in the 1960s. And what it does, which is an anomaly from what most cities do, even where the city council sets salaries, is in Minneapolis, they do it by resolution. And in most cities where the council does it, they do it by ordinance. That has a big practical effect because when you do it by resolution, there's no public hearing. It can be done, walked right onto the council. Conversely, in Minneapolis, when you do an ordinance, it goes to a committee, they go through the language, they have a public hearing, it goes back to the city council, so it's a much more, if you do it by ordinance, it's a much more transparent way of doing it than doing it by resolution. And I would just say, as in my prior life, I was drawing up those resolutions the day before a city council meeting where it would be walked on, the agenda amended at that time, and so there was no notice to the public at all of salary setting. And so, at least for transparency purposes, even doing an ordinance, requiring it to be done by ordinance, it would be a significant change. Mr. Carl.
Mr. Chair, I must hasten to point out, given your history, which is correct, that the council did adopt an ordinance which prescribes now a process requiring that resolution on mayor and council salary go to the standing committee of the council for a hearing, not a public hearing, but to be considered at the committee before final action by the full council. So there was an effort by council to insert greater transparency into that process, that the resolution would have to be published and be before the standing committee before any final action by the city council. So yes, to your point about the difference between a resolution and ordinance, and I think the council, because the special law requires a resolution, attempted to find some balance with that by saying it must come to a committee first before it goes to full council.
Thank you. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if this is a question or just a comment, that your comments give food for thought to two things. One is, if the issue is more transparency, then that could be a compromise in terms of who decides what the salaries are. I'm not proposing it, I'm just saying it's an issue. And also, whether if we were to take on that role, if the charter were amended, would we have public hearings? And presumably we would.
I don't want to foreclose a discussion at the Amendment Review Committee, but I think, there are a number of issues that we would consider as you looked at that. Transparency is one, and then just what the obvious one for a lot of people is what looks like a conflict when you set your own salary. So there are a number of items to look at and decide if we think there's use in having a change, and whether the change is ordinance, whether it's a different body setting it, whether it would be this body or some other body, or you can just do it, set it to identify a particular consumer index report and just have it tag along with that. I mean, there are things to think about. But again, I don't want to foreclose the discussion at Amendment Review Committee for those things to talk about.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kozak, Chair of the Amendment Review Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would be helpful to know, and maybe Mr. Carl could tell us, in our voluminous information today, I didn't see anything about other cities and how they determine their city council and mayor salaries. If we could, before we have a meeting to discuss this in the committee, maybe we could get a few examples of how many cities have some kind of independent third-party group that decides how much, and who are they? Or is it a charter commission? Is it some kind of special But if we could just get just some, at least some sketchy information about that, that might help us when we do have a discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I certainly, through my own research, have some knowledge of this, but I think this is one of the issues that I'm going to take responsibility for dropping the ball on this. I recall, and I turned to our Guidehouse guests and friends and said, didn't we ask you to also look at this issue? And it was not within the scope of their study. But I think that would be maybe a better approach, is ask some outside, disinterested folk to look into that issue for us and to report back. And so I will happily work with Guidehouse on considering their follow-up work and what that would entail to bring forward sort of that comparable cities, how salaries are set.
Thank you. I would appreciate that if we could get that from Guidehouse. Oh, Commissioner Holquist.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginder. This is more just like me being new here. So for the amendment committee, is that separate from the governance committee? Okay. And are those two coming together? I guess what I'm worried about is that the governance committee seems to be on the track of we're probably going to need an amendment. Does that then switch over to the amendment committee, and then is the amendment committee doing too much? Or, yeah, enlighten me.
No. Well, there are a couple of parts to answer your question. They are two separate committees. The government structure was formed really to look at literally the structure of the government. And so that was the executive mayor, legislative council, now looking at such things as, the ward districts, the size, that kind of thing. Amendment review is generally set up to take on items either from citizens, a citizen petition, or in this case, the mayor, which is a citizen, to take a look at that and decide what we would want to do with it. So it's separate committees. And I would note for newer members, if you would like to join either committee, if you're not on either committee or would like to be on both committees, simply send an email to the clerk and copy me on it, and we tend to say yes. And so they are separate committees, and they have separate tasks. They typically will not join together.
Awesome. I have noticed that many of us are on many committees. So follow-up comment and question, and this is taking us a little bit off track, but I think is relevant. Do we know when we need to have an amendment decision made by for the upcoming election?
What we do. Mr. Carl?
Through the chair, Commissioner Holquist, the timeline for a ballot question initiated by this body would be roughly mid-July. The statutory deadline requires it to be so many weeks before the date of the election, which puts us at the beginning of August. You have to back up from that because it's the council's responsibility to draft the actual language that goes on the ballot. So this body, if it's going to submit a question to the voters, would need to have its work concluded by about mid-July in order to give the council sufficient time to create the ballot language and finalize that so that I can get that to the county by the statutory deadline.
Thank you so much. Again, new here. The language we give you can be like, we want amendment on this, or does it have to be like legally structured already?
Yes. When we propose an amendment, we will have it laid out in all of its wonderful format with strikeouts and ads underlined and everything. We'll have the proposed amendment in its entirety. And so, for example, as we're getting close on department heads, one of the things I would like to see the government structure do is actually draft a language. It will come back to us then for final discussion, necessary public hearing, and then forward on if we decide to put it on a ballot or not. And so, yes, it's a lawyer's delight. Commissioner Schneider.
Microphone.
Sorry, could you please refresh my memory about, isn't there a step where the council gets an opportunity to revise the language that this body?
No, not from this body. And I'm going to take a pause here because our discussion is leading into our next item. And so, so where we're at on the next item, since we've referred this to the Amendment Review Committee, the next item is new commissioner orientation. We haven't had one for a number of years. I think actually 2018 might have been the last formal presentation on new commissioner orientation. And so I asked Mr. Carl to put something together again on this because we have a number of new members, and it's also a good checkpoint for members that have been around for a while. And so I know that he's taken a lot of work that he's done for the city council, for new members of the city council, put it into this. So he's going to address amendments, charter amendments, our role, and also get into, typically fun stuff like open meeting law briefly, or data practices, which we are all subject to. And so for those of you who work for the legislature where you're not subject to data practices, to a bit maybe, but this body is subject to data practice and open meeting law. So it's nice to get just a brief overview of what that means. So with that, Mr. Carl, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to members. My name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as the clerk for the City of Minneapolis. As you know, it's my pleasure to present to you the 2026 Charter Commissioner Handbook. Hopefully each one of you has a copy of this, brand new, hot off the presses a few hours ago. The goal for this was to provide for this body in one place relevant information about the charter, the city charter, the Charter Commission, as well as the authority and core duties of the Charter Commission, and as Chair Ginder indicated, being both a reference manual ongoing, but also an opportunity for us to provide an orientation. So again, hopefully each of you has a copy of this. I did email it also to our group email address, so you have both a printed copy and a soft copy or digital copy. If you didn't get the email today, let me or Michael know, and we'll make sure that you have a copy of that. And of course, we'll upload it into the file for this meeting so that it could also be accessed there. As my first slide indicates, tonight, using this handbook, I plan to go over the contents, summarizing it as best I can, knowing that I'm a talker. We're going to cover the different chapters, which include municipal government in the state of Minnesota, the city charter itself, as well as generally home rule authority, the role of the Charter Commission, how to amend the city charter, and then there is a final chapter in there that we won't have to talk about for a little bit, about 2 more years, and that's redistricting, another job that is assigned to this body based on an amendment in 2010. So I'll start by addressing how cities are classified under the law in the state of Minnesota. And as you can see in the lower right corner of this slide and in future slides, I've included reference to the pages in the handbook if you want to follow along, or tonight, if you find yourself unable to sleep, feel free to grab your handbook and enjoy that. Essentially, Minnesota classifies cities which are legally structured as municipal corporations according to a combination of 2 factors. Those are on the slide here. First, the governing authority under which the city is established and in which it operates. And then second, the city's population as certified by the U.S. Census Bureau. So with respect to governing authority, that first category or criterion, cities in Minnesota are either created under the auspices of a home rule charter provided under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 410, or they are created under and are subject to the statutory code for cities found under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 412. Of the 853 cities in Minnesota, 746 are classified as statutory cities, and that's about 87% of all cities in the state. That means the majority of the state's cities are created by and operate under the direct control of the state legislature through that statutory code for municipalities. And that means that those cities operate and are structured according to the code provided for them. 107 cities in Minnesota, including Minneapolis, are charter cities. Those cities operate under their own home rule charters. That accounts for about 13% of all the cities in the state. A charter city has more local control and authority over its own organization and its own operations than does a statutory city, since a charter essentially functions as a type of city constitution. Minnesota was the 4th state in the nation to permit home rule authority when voters approved an amendment to the state constitution in 1896. As you know, Minneapolis is a charter city, and our home rule charter was first adopted in 1920. That was about 24 years after home rule authority was amended in the Constitution. Minneapolis was the 62nd city in the state to establish a home rule charter. We were not first to the game. In fact, we were rather late to the process of getting a home rule charter, and that followed several failed attempts. The other factor used to classify cities, shown here as population. In Minnesota, state law says there are 4 classes of city, which are based on certified population totals, shown on this slide. So you can see there's the first class, second, third, and fourth. First class being those that have a population of at least 100,000 residents or more. So according to those 2 criteria, then, Minneapolis is a city of the first class, which operates under the auspices of Home Rule Charter. As already mentioned, the Home Rule Charter is like the city's constitution. Through the Home Rule Charter, a community leverages the constitutional provision to exercise greater local control over the creation, formation, and operation of a municipal government. And that means that through the Home Rule Charter, residents of a city can claim greater powers of self-governance to provide for the common health, safety, and welfare of their community. And while it does many things, I say this frequently, the charter does essentially 3 components of a city government. First, it defines the powers and the authority that the city has as a municipal corporation in the state of Minnesota. Every city, as you know, is a creation of the state government, whether they're organized under a charter or under the statutory code. So the state retains ultimate authority over all cities. However, as I've said, charter cities have a bit more freedom and derive their governing authority from their charters, which are themselves derived directly from the state's constitutional provision for home rule authority and by those statutory provisions codified under Chapter 410. Second, the charter prescribes a city's operating structure. That includes identifying its principal officers and their powers and duties. For Minneapolis, the city charter prescribes an executive mayor, legislative council structure, which, as you know, was approved by voters in the 2021 municipal general election, and I'll speak more about that in just a moment. Finally, the city charter specifies the formal processes by which the city, as a municipal corporation, takes its official action and how those actions are then implemented and enforced. Some examples of the types of official actions that are prescribed in the council here in Minneapolis include the way in which the city council enacts public policies through its ordinances. That is prescribed in the charter. Also, the manner in which the mayor proposes a budget to finance the operations of the city, are detailed in the budget. And then also the way in which certain department heads are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council, as we have already discussed. Where the city charter is often referred to as a constitution, then, on the other side of this slide, the Charter Commission is the city's standing constitutional convention. Chapter 2 of your handbook is really focused on the Charter Commission, and it provides information about how the Charter Commission is appointed, how it's organized, and how it operates. As our city's constitutional convention, the Charter Commission holds the charter in trust for the people of Minneapolis. It is the Charter Commission that is vested with authority to propose amendments aimed at improving the city's core governance from a constitutional perspective. It is not the Charter Commission's duty, nor does it have the authority to set city policy direction. That's a proper function of the council, of course. But it is the Charter Commission's core duty to ensure that the foundational governing document of the city remains responsive to the needs, the priorities, and the preferences of the community, now and into the future. In this capacity, the Charter Commission not only has the authority to propose any amendments to the city charter, but it also plays a key role in proposals to amend the city charter that originate from other sources permitted by law. And I'll talk about those in a little bit. In this regard, the Charter Commission exercises a unique form of quasi-constitutional authority, which doesn't really neatly fit within the sort of known legislative, executive, and judicial functions of government. A bit of history. When the Minnesota Constitution was amended in 1896 to provide for home rule authority, the state legislature at that time considered their options for how to create local charter commissions. First, they considered that the state legislators who represent the city could and possibly should serve as that city's charter commission. That was one option. Second, they considered that the city council should be the charter commission for its own city, or that the city council should appoint the charter commission. That was a second option. And then third, they considered appointment by the judicial district through the district court, placing charter commissions within the judicial branch of the state government. In considering those options, the state legislature rejected options to have charter commissions appointed by state legislatures or city councils due to the potential for actual or perceived political conflicts or abuses, especially the concept of leaving the matter to the city's governing body itself to act as a charter commission. That option was deemed the equivalent legally of leaving the fox to guard the chicken coop. So, by the process of elimination, the preference was to delegate the appointment authority for charter commissions to the judicial branch, empowering the district courts in each case to decide those appointments, which was deemed by the legislature at that time to be the most palatable political choice and the one least likely to present conflicts between the regular functions and duties of the courts and that quasi-constitutional work of charter commissions in framing up a charter. And so as a consequence, judicial officials are disqualified from serving as members of charter commissions. I noted that a charter commission's authority in terms of framing and amending charters is extensive. Under Minnesota law, a charter commission is imbued with broad discretion in both drafting and submitting an original charter, as well as any amendments to the voters. It may provide for any form of government that is not in conflict with the state constitution, and it may also provide for the structure, the distribution of powers within that structure, and the essential procedures for the municipal corporation, as I've already highlighted. It also may create departments and assign their functions and responsibilities, and it may regulate all municipal functions as fully as if the same had been done by the state legislature prior to the Constitutional Home Rule Amendment in 1896. And I'm pulling all of that directly from Chapter 410, and I've cited some of that in your handbook if you want to cross-reference that. Again, here it shows that's from Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 and the relevant pages. So this slide then presents the formal table of organization for the city of Minneapolis. I'm sure you've seen this before. This shows the executive, mayor, legislative council form of government dictated by the city charter, as well as its further implementation by the government structure omnibus ordinance that was enacted by the council and mayor in October 2022. With respect to government structure, I'm referring to the content in Chapter 1 of your handbook in Section 3, which begins on page 8. As you know, the form of government is based on the strong mayor-council system, which is itself then modeled on the government structures found at both federal and state levels. It is a system of shared powers that are separated into different modes, or what we also refer to as branches of government. This structure was adopted by voters at the 2021 municipal general election. It was codified as Charter Amendment number 184. The City Council, as shown here, is the legislative body of the city in which the legislative, the primary policymaking, and oversight authority resides. It has the authority to enact, amend, or repeal local laws and public policies. Its official functions, although not formally expressed in the charter, are focused on translating public will and priorities and values into codified laws, rules, and regulations. In addition to its legislative responsibilities, the council is also designated by state law concurrently to serve as the Minneapolis Community Health Board, the Board of Equalization, the Municipal Canvassing Board, the Board of Commissioners for the Minneapolis Community Development Agency, and as the Minneapolis Port Authority. So in addition to being council, they hold the responsibility for those 5 legal capacities and have the powers to exercise the duties of those separate bodies. And also, finally, under state law and city charter, the council holds any and all general or residual powers that belong to a municipal corporation under the state and can take action on the city's behalf in any matter that's required, except where those specific powers, duties, or functions have been assigned to the mayor or to others by law. As part of the legislative branch of the city, too, the charter also provides for 2 elected policymaking bodies. Those are the Board of Estimate and Taxation, which is created under Article 5 of the charter, and the Park and Recreation Board of Commissioners, created under Article 6. And you can see those on the same row with the mayor and council. Both of these elected policymaking bodies are considered separate, independent departments within the overall city enterprise. Balancing that multi-pronged legislative branch is the mayor, who is elected by voters to be the chief executive officer of the city and its chief elected official. The court has held that the duties of a mayor designated as a city's chief executive officer are similar to those of a governor in relationship to the state. Thus, the mayor of Minneapolis is the head of its executive branch and of the administration. It occupies the highest office in the municipal government, where the council, the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and the Park Board are all primarily focused on policy making. The mayor's official functions then are focused primarily on the implementation, administration, and enforcement of the city's priorities, policies, and programs. The charter places the mayor between the three elected policymaking bodies. The mayor has the authority to approve or veto the official acts of the council and the park board and is a voting member with a seat on the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Minneapolis no longer has its own municipal court system, although it did years ago. Instead, the judicial functions of the city government are addressed by the state's 4th Judicial District, which covers all of Hennepin County. The city's administration refers to those operating departments in the executive branch that are under the direction, supervision, and control of the mayor. You can see that on this chart. The chart shows that there are 3 direct reports to the mayor. These executive officers form the mayor's cabinet, and they are responsible for overseeing and directing the operations of a portion of the municipal corporation under the mayor's leadership. The 3 executive officers are the city attorney. The city attorney is the city's chief legal officer, attorney, and counselor at law. In that broad capacity, the attorney serves the mayor, the city council, and all of its committees, all municipal officers, boards, and commissions and departments, with the one exception of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Commission, when they act in their official capacities. The city attorney is the head of the Office of City Attorney, which is the city's legal department. And I would point out, and I'm sure Mr. Ginder and also our own assigned attorney will concur with this one and point out, it is the city as the municipal corporation who is the client of the city attorney, not the mayor, not the council, not specific departments. The entire enterprise, the municipal corporation, is the city attorney's client. And that client is served both by the appointed city attorney and by the attorneys who work under her designation within the Office of City Attorney. The city operations officer is the city's chief operations and administrative officer. This position is very similar in other organizations to a city manager or a city's administrative officer. Under the mayor's leadership and direction, the city operations officer, we've shortened that to COO, plans, organizes, coordinates, and ensures the effective operation of the entire city enterprise. The COO is head of the Office of Public Service, which provides a unified chain of command for 17 of the 25 operating departments. So you can see under the Office of Public Service there, a lighter shaded blue box with all of those departments within it. So all of those departments report up ultimately to the city operations officer, who reports directly to the mayor. And then the third executive officer is the Community Safety Commissioner. That position provides a unified chain of command for the 5 departments involved in community safety functions. You can see that off to the far left of the chart. Those 5 departments are, of course, police and fire departments, the neighborhood safety department, as well as emergency management and emergency communications, or 911. There has been discussion about which department heads are appointed by the mayor or others, and who are appointed by the mayor subject to confirmation by the city council. We've had that conversation tonight, and I have included in your handbook a chart that shows this, hopefully in a very simple, straightforward manner, on page 14. I'm going to dive a little bit into the Charter Commission now. As already noted, the Charter Commission is an agency of the state. It is not a body appointed by the city, nor is it subject to the city's control. It has very broad authority with respect to framing, maintaining, and amending the charter. I already said quasi-constitutional powers. The Minneapolis Charter Commission is composed of 15 members. That's the highest amount of commissioners that a charter commission in the state of Minnesota can have. So we have a very large charter commission in Minneapolis. All of those seats are appointed by the district court, acting by and through its chief judge. All members are appointed to 4-year terms with no restriction on the number of terms that may be served. To be appointed, an individual must be a resident and a qualified voter of the city. By law, charter commissioners are not paid for their service. I'm sorry. Any charter commissioner may resign their seat, and a commissioner can be removed for any reason by order of the court for failing to perform their official duties or for missing 4 consecutive meetings without excuse. A charter commission can be terminated also following the process prescribed by state law. Essentially, that's the reverse of creating a charter commission. So if a petition were filed that we no longer want to have a charter commission, we would go through that process, and in the end, if that question passed by the voters, then the charter commission would be terminated. Uniquely, though, you can't have a charter without a charter commission. So the motion to undo the charter commission automatically voids the charter, and we would revert back to a statutory city and be under the thumb of the state. Details about the Charter Commission are found in the handbook on pages 15 through 17. The Charter Commission is empowered to determine its own structure within the 15 members appointed by the judge, and it has done so through its rules primarily. As shown on this slide, and we did the election tonight, congratulations again, the Charter Commission elects its own officers, a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. These officers are elected at the organizational meeting each January, and they serve a term of 1 year. These officers have the usual and customary duties that are assigned to those positions. The chair, being the central officer of the body, is really the first amongst a body of equals. I think that's very important to reiterate. The chair is not the supervisor of the body. The chair is not the director of the body. All powers of the Charter Commission are vested in the body, in the 15 members. The chair is the servant, the primary servant of the body, and the chief amongst the equal body. The position of chair is primarily focused on planning, preparing, and presiding at meetings of the full body, and for serving as the body's spokesperson in interactions with the chief judge, for example, the mayor and city council, news media, and the general public. And as a consequence, of course, then much of the Charter Commission's work is planned and organized by or through the chair. The chair is also the primary contact with your support staff and generally directs and oversees their work on behalf of the Charter Commission. As required by the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, the Charter Commission is required to adopt a calendar of its regular meetings, and that calendar then serves as public notice of all of those regular meetings for the year. State law requires only that the Charter Commission convene once each year, that they organize its membership and consider any proposals at that time to amend the city charter. In practice, though, the Commission meets on a more frequent basis. As some of you long-term members know, in the past, the Charter Commission had regular meetings on a monthly basis. More recently, we've scaled that back to having regular meetings on a quarterly basis with the option to call special meetings if needed. Special meetings are called either by the chair or by 5 commissioners. That's according to the rules. The Charter Commission is authorized to adopt its own rules to govern its operations and its proceedings, which it has done. The latest revision to those rules was made in 2022, and a copy of those rules are posted in LIMS. In its rules, the Charter Commission has also further adopted Robert's Rules of Order newly revised as a parliamentary authority to address procedural questions not first addressed by your rules. So, of course, Robert's is the last line of defense when our rules don't cover how we operate. The Commission also may organize committees and work groups to meet its needs. We've talked about that a little bit tonight. In 2021, it established its first standing committee, and that is the Amendment Review Committee. Originally, that committee was tasked with taking the responsibility for reviewing, evaluating, and making recommendations on amendment proposals that were submitted by citizen petitions. So that was its original purpose, so that there was a group of people who really looked at those citizen petitions and evaluated those. That has expanded to considering, I would leave it to the chair to correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sort of is the refining group. Work groups come up with proposals and develop them, and then if there's a need for refinement, the Amendment Review Committee can consider those.
That's correct, and also I think we've expanded it to take on some items that have been generated internally, as well as, for example, some citizen petitions. For example, in this case, the mayor's that we talked about today.
So the Commission also has a long-standing practice of forming work groups to give focused attention to various amendment proposals. So, for example, currently, the Commission has an even-year elections work group, we have a government structure work group, and we have an appointments work group. Those work groups then are responsible for developing, reviewing, refining, and making recommendations about specific amendment proposals to the full body. Work groups are usually, but not always, co-chaired by two commissioners who are identified by the commission chair, subject to some ratification by this body. As the chair indicated earlier, membership on work groups is a very difficult bar to raise. You raise your hand and you're probably on a work group. Finally, in terms of resources and support, the city clerk and the city attorney's offices are the primary staff resources that have been allocated to support the Charter Commission in its work. Although I would point out the city clerk and the city attorney are not employees of the Charter Commission. We work with you, not for you. The city clerk is responsible for marshaling the resources internally necessary to support the commission's work, works very closely with the chair to facilitate communications with the judge, with the mayor and the council, and with departments within the city enterprise. In addition, the city clerk or their designee serves as your recording secretary and maintains the records and files of the Charter Commission. The city attorney assigns an assistant city attorney. We have Andrea Neff at the dais, and that assistant city attorney then serves as legal counsel and advisor to the Charter Commission. It's their job to advise on interpreting the charter and also providing legal drafting services. So as you get into the work of drafting amendment proposals, Ms. Neff or the city attorney's office through her connection will help on that regard. This is the dry part, but essential part, operations and legal requirements. So in addition to those organizational issues I've summarized, the Commission's operations are covered in the handbook in Chapter 2. I wanted to highlight at least 3 state laws that do impact the Charter Commission. And these 3 state laws shown on the slide are sometimes also described as sunshine laws because they are focused on government accessibility and accountability. And they are intended to assure that government works in full view of the public and to protect the public's right to know what its government is doing. The first of these shown is the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. It's codified as Chapter 13D in the Minnesota statutes. The Charter Commission is subject, as the chair has pointed out, to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. This law defines the various types of meetings that public bodies, and that's the phrase I'm going to use because that's what the statute refers to them as, public bodies, the types of meetings they can conduct, as well as the notice requirements for those meetings. The law was enacted to benefit the public, not us, to benefit the public, and it includes a presumption of openness subject to very limited and carefully restrained exceptions. The Minnesota Supreme Court has noted that the purpose of this law is deeply rooted in the fundamental proposition that a well-informed populace is essential to the vitality of our democratic form of government. And as the Minnesota Court of Appeals stated in 1985, the open meeting law has 3 primary purposes. First, to prohibit action taken at a secret meeting where it is not possible for the interested public to become fully informed concerning the public body's decisions or to detect improper influences. So, under the law, meetings of bodies that are subject to its regulation must be open to public observation, and they must be conducted in a public place that's within the territorial confines of that body. What that means for us is prior notice of every meeting has to go out. The meeting has to be open to public observation, whether in person. We broadcast these meetings because that's a way of extending that ability to observe proceedings for those who aren't here in person, and it must be within the limits of the city government, the city's corporate limits. Second, to assure the public's right to be informed about the work of public bodies. We talked about that. And third, to afford the public the opportunity to present its views to the body. So one of the reasons you have a public comment period at the end of each of your regular meetings. Interestingly, the law does not itself define what a meeting is. Instead, the Supreme Court, in interpreting the law, has concluded that a meeting, under the meaning of the open meeting law, refers to any gathering of a quorum or more of the members of a public body who is subject to the law's regulation, and that also applies to any committee, subcommittee, working group of the body, at which the members discuss, decide, or receive information as a group about any issues that relate to the official business of this body. That's a very broad definition. It means anytime a quorum of the body or any subgrouping of this body are meeting and talking about, receiving information about, or deciding issues, that's a meeting. And there should have been a prior notice. There needs to be the opportunity for the public to observe and hear, and also an opportunity to participate if that's allowed by law. So a meeting is considered to be open when the following conditions are all met. 1, proper advance notice is given. 2, the public can observe. And 3, copies of all of the materials that you have at your desk, the agenda, the reports, and anything else that are at the meeting need to be available to public inspection during the meeting. That's one of the reasons the clerk spends a lot of time making sure that we put extra copies out. The law only requires us to provide 1 copy for public inspection. If you've noticed, here in Minneapolis, we make multiple copies. People will walk off with the agenda and copies of reports. We want that. We want our public to be engaged. So we always keep 1 here, but we make multiple copies. At least 1 copy has to be available in the room for public inspection. There are penalties for violations of the open meeting law. I'm going to summarize that because it's important it applies to you personally. Any individual who's found to have violated the open meeting law is subject to personal liability in the form of a civil penalty in an amount not to exceed $300 for the first occurrence. It can't be paid by the public body. Individuals found guilty of violating the open meeting law must pay for it themselves. On the third violation that's found and upheld, the individual will forfeit any right to serve on the public body, and in addition, they can't serve for a period equal to the full term of office for that body. So there are pretty stiff legal consequences or penalties for people who are found guilty of violating the open meeting law. The second law on here I want to talk about is the Minnesota Official Records Act. This is codified under Minnesota Statute Section 15.17. It requires that all government entities make and preserve the records necessary to a full and accurate knowledge of their official activities. Very broadly, the city clerk is the designated custodian of the city's official records and is then responsible for ensuring compliance with this law. Through my office's work as your recording secretary, we also handle this requirement for the Charter Commission. Primarily, official records of the Charter Commission would include its meeting agendas, its minutes, any formal reports that you receive, and any official communications or correspondence related to official functions. Official records are different than government data, which I'm going to cover in a bit, so I wanted to make sure to cover official records. Official records belong to the Commission, and they are the kinds of records I've already identified. Your agendas and minutes are the biggest example of that. But the final act that I put on here, my personal favorite, the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, which is codified under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 13, also impacts the Charter Commission and all local governments, except, surprisingly, the state legislature, which operates under its own act, which is not nearly as restrictive. It's a very complex law, and it changes with almost every single legislative session. The Government Data Practices Act establishes a system to classify government data to define what information is public and what information is not public. It also specifies who may access that data and under what conditions or criteria. Imposes a duty on the city to, and any agency that's subject to its regulation, to keep its public data separate from its private or confidential or not public data, and to preserve the two in a way that public data is able to be accessed, but that not public, confidential, or private data is not released. The Act also establishes a presumption that all government data is public unless there is a specific statutory exemption provided in the law. So we start excuse me, with the presumption that any government data is public. The thing that's important to remember here is data is not necessarily an official record. An official record is data, but data can be more than an official record. And so your emails are government data when it concerns your work as the Charter Commission and the work of the Charter Commission. My emails to you are considered government data. A draft of an agenda that never gets published and might not even make it in a public meeting is also considered government data. So we have a duty to make sure that all government data is classified and is accessible if it's classified by public as public data and doesn't meet one of those statutory exemptions for making that data public. It's a very burdensome law that applies to all local governments. And here again, because we act in a capacity to support the Charter Commission, to a large extent, requests for government data by the Charter Commission are handled by my office, just like we do the Official Records Act. I will conclude my very dry synopsis of these 3 laws by offering what I think would be very good advice. If you have questions or concerns about any of these laws or any other laws I didn't cover that affect this body, or if you have questions about other laws that may apply to this body, please see the Office of City Attorney. Please contact Ms. Neff, and she will follow up with you and give you the inner workings of the law and how it does or doesn't apply to you and what advice she would give for your next steps. I think I've been clear on the law, correct? Talk to the city attorney.
And if I can interject one thing on that. This body has been subject to data practices requests, and when you get them, you will find out that they are burdensome. So, for example, if you keep your agenda with all your handwritten notes on it, and it's applicable to the topic that they request on, you're required to turn these over. It's also useful, for example, if you're conducting business on this, to try and use the city email system as much as possible, unless you like going through your own phone and computer for Charter Commission related data. It's Mr. Carl is the responsible authority for the city, so his office is the overarching, has the overarching responsibility for that. But I will tell you, having been involved in a number of these things, stuff that you don't need. And so the more you like to hold on to stuff, the more data you have that might be responsive to a request. Again, I try to, as much as I can, use the city email for charter business instead of my own personal email or my own laptop or whatever. So just kind of a bit of advice.
Echoing on your comments, Mr. Chair, I would say that's one of the reasons we created email accounts, city email accounts for this body, is so that you could make use of that for strictly city business and not have your personal email become embroiled in data practices requests or made public data itself. And so, yes, I would encourage you to use those city-provided email accounts. And the second thing I would encourage all of us to do is to maintain good data hygiene. If it's not required to be kept, you shouldn't keep it.
Yes.
Just a really quick question. Man, it's getting late. Sorry. With regard to hybrid meetings, what is the requirement for either hybrid or online meeting requirements and posting of notices and ensuring the public has access to that? I'm on other councils where at least one person has to be in the room and notices have to be published a certain number of days in advance. Is that true for our work as well?
Through the chair, Commissioner Nye, yes. The easy answer here is that a meeting is a meeting and still has to be noticed to the public. The requirements for interactive technology is how the statute refers to a hybrid or an online meeting, whether it's 100% remote or a hybrid of in-person and remote. The technical requirements of the law, so the state legislature eased the burden that allowed the use of remote or hybrid during the pandemic. There were certain allowances made. The original statute would not have allowed hybrid meetings coming out of the pandemic, and so the state legislature acted to ease that requirement in many ways, but there still is the burden that there must be one member of the body in the normal meeting space, and that every member of the body and every member of the public who wishes to observe, whether in person in this room or remotely, have to be able to simultaneously see and hear all members of the body. And so sadly, we don't have a system that supports that. So our city systems, which is Teams, which we used for remote or hybrid meetings, especially when you combine it with broadcast, which we do for this body, do not allow that mixture of remote access, in-person access, broadcast capability, captioning support, and simultaneous visual and audible participation by all members of the body. So it's permissive, but you have to meet those technical requirements. Mr. Chair, move forward?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
good. Apologize for taking so long. I'm going to slide into amending the city charter. This slide shows that there are two pathways, and I took the content for this section, which is admittedly the longest in your membership, your member handbook, because it is the most complex. But I tried to boil that down in this chart to show you there are two pathways. There is the primary pathway shown in green on this chart. It involves submitting a proposal to amend the charter to the electorate for a decision. This path involves a ballot question to the voters. It was originally the only means of amending a city charter, in line with the concept that a charter is our constitution and only the voters should decide whether or not to amend a constitution. So as you can see, this law provides for three different ways for a ballot question to be formulated. First, by this body, the Charter Commission. In its capacity as our constitutional convention, the Charter Commission always has the ability to propose an amendment that should be referred to the voters. That's noted here as 1A. The second way is for a citizen petition proposing an amendment to be fully processed according to state law, which then would result in a ballot question referred to voters. That's identified as 2 on this slide. And then the third way for a ballot question to be referred to voters is for the proposal to be generated by the city council and then submitted to the electorate for a decision, identified as number 3, all in green here under that primary pathway. Regardless of where a proposed amendment originates, there are some preliminary factors to consider. First, any proposed charter amendment must be harmonized and in alignment with state law. No proposed amendment may stand which is found to be contrary to or in conflict with state law. In such instances, the statutory provisions prevail and the charter provision is deemed ineffective either in whole or in part to the extent that it conflicts with established state policy. For this reason, proposed amendments are subject to a legal analysis by the Office of City Attorney to verify its constitutionality. What I mean by that is that the subject matter is not in conflict with, nor is it contrary to applicable existing state law or policy, and it is considered a proper subject matter for a home rule charter. Unless the subject matter of a proposed amendment is authorized by law, the city is under no legal obligation to refer the ballot question to the electorate. Second, all statutory requirements and timelines for submitting a ballot question must be satisfied or the matter may not be referred to voters. The city clerk's office prepares an amendment timeline each year to help guide the procedures related to ballot questions. For citizen petitions, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the proposal must be received by May 1st each year. Otherwise, it will not meet the statutory deadline to submit a ballot question to voters. For ballot questions initiated by the Charter Commission or by the City Council, there's a bit more leeway because we don't have to look at the legal requirements related to processing petitions, for example, validating the signatures that are required. For ballot questions initiated by the Charter Commission or by the City Council, the deadline set by state law is no later than 84 days before the date of the election. 84 days works out to being approximately 12 weeks. So if you look at that first Tuesday in November and count back 12 weeks, that puts you up to August. And then, as I said earlier, in order for the council to do its work to formalize a ballot question, we need to add a little bit of time. So that means the deadline would be about mid-July each year for a ballot question that would be originated by either this body or by the City Council. This slide describes the Charter Commission's authority with respect to ballot questions. Obviously, you, as I mentioned, have the authority to present a ballot question at any time, so I don't detail your authority here. That's your authority. But with respect to, in the first instance, those that are proposed by a citizen's petition, you can see here that the Charter Commission plays a ministerial role. The Charter Commission has no legal authority to consider the merits of the underlying proposal or to provide any check against the ability of citizens to petition a ballot question for the electorate. In this case, the Charter Commission's role is restricted solely to approving a summary of the amendment proposal itself that needs to be included in the petition pages if the proposal exceeds 1,000 words. If the proposal is less than 1,000 words, then that full proposal has to be on the petition pages to be circulated and signed by voters. So other than this ministerial duty, the Charter Commission doesn't have a further role with respect to citizen petitions. However, in the second instance shown here, and that's amendment proposals initiated by the council as ballot questions, the Charter Commission does play a very significant and substantive role. In this instance, the Charter Commission considers the merits of the proposed amendment, and it has up to a total of 150 days to review the council's proposed amendment. at the end of that review period, the Charter Commission can take one of three actions, or has three options shown on this slide. First, it can approve that proposed amendment submitted by the council and refer it back with its recommendation that that should be submitted to the electorate as a ballot question. Second, it could reject the proposed amendment as it was submitted and refer back to the City Council its recommendation not to have the matter referred to the voters and its reasons for not having that question submitted to the electorate. And then third, it could offer a substitute proposal of its own design on the same subject matter and refer that proposal back to the City Council with the recommendation that its proposal should be referred to the voters. Ultimately, however, in this case, regardless of which action this body takes, whether to approve, reject, or offer a substitute, it is up to the City Council to decide what action it will take. So after this body acts and gives its recommendation, the City Council can take whatever action it wants to do. It can refer its original proposal, whether you agree or not. It can concur not to submit the question that year, maybe further refine the proposal for a future year, or it could submit the proposal from this body as a ballot question to voters. So all of those details are addressed in your manual, and I'm showing that on pages 30 to 41. Finally, with respect to those proposals to amend the city charter by ordinance, this slide addresses that. This was shown in blue in that previous slide. I'll go back just to reference it. So on the right side of this chart, you'll see by ordinance can be done 1B by the Charter Commission or 4 by the City Council. And the reason those numbers are on there, if you do look in your manual, this model is reproduced, and underneath the model it refers to 1A, 1B as the Charter Commission's role, 2, the citizen petition, 3, the City Council by ballot referendum, and 4, City Council by ordinance. And then for each of those numbers, I've referenced a specific state statute, how that pathway is determined. So that's why the numbers are on that slide. So back to here. Charter amendments by ordinance. This secondary pathway was developed by the state legislature as a secondary means of amending municipal charters without going directly to voters. So it bypasses the electorate. It was designed to handle amendments to charters that are highly technical, that are largely administrative and non-controversial. So for that reason, sometimes these amendments are also referred to as housekeeping amendments. It's cleaning up the charter to make it easier, to bring it into modern times, and to address very, very technical things that potentially the voters would not have enough information to make that decision. Amendments by ordinance can originate either with the Charter Commission or the City Council. Either way, regardless of where it originates, the law requires that amendments by ordinance meet several criteria, which I've put on this slide. First, the Charter Commission has to agree that the proposed amendment is appropriate to be made by ordinance, thereby bypassing the electorate. Second, after that determination, the commission gives its amendment back to the council. The council has to pass an ordinance with a unanimous vote of the entire membership. So that means that the ordinance has to be adopted 13-0. All 13 council members have to vote in support. It is the highest vote threshold required by law for a city council in Minnesota. If even one member of the body objects, the amendment fails. After the council acts, assuming they get the unanimous vote, the ordinance is referred to the mayor, and the mayor must approve the ordinance, and then it's enacted. If the mayor vetoes the ordinance, it fails. Finally, because the ordinance, this pathway bypasses the electorate, the city charter, as the Constitution, provides that there is a 60-day protest period. So during that first 60 days after the ordinance is enacted, if a protest petition is filed and found to be sufficient, then the matter must be referred to voters. Remember, as a constitution, voters should always have the final say on the city charter. So although this initially bypasses the voters, a petition, if filed and found sufficient within that 60-day window, requires an automatic referral to the voters to make that decision. Again, details about this process are in your handbook, pages 41 to 43. And then finally, I wanted to highlight some standards for considering proposed amendments. For those of you who are around, you'll recall that several years ago, in fact, I believe it was October of 2020, then Chair Clegg had suggested that this body should develop. We were in the middle of getting a lot of amendments at that point. It went from an amendment every few years, once a decade, to multiples per year. And the chair said we should have some standards by which to evaluate and consider these proposals. And he brought these forward, and the body in October of 2020 adopted those standards. I've included them in your supplemental notes in the last 2 pages. So if you turn to the last 2 pages of your handbook in an appendix, I've not only put these standards, but when they adopted these, the body, the Charter Commission, adopted a series of supplemental notes explaining each one of these 6 standards. So I would refer you to that appendix for a lot more detail. But here they are. First, is the amendment germane to the charter? Again, that lens of constitutionality. A constitution should be brief and should only address those matters required to frame up the government. It should not address matters of policy or operations. So, is the amendment germane to the charter? Is the amendment well considered? Might also be called well timed. Is it appropriate to consider that now? Third, is the amendment clear and is it specific? Obviously, we don't want vague charter amendments that create problems later on with interpretation or what was the meaning of that, or internal conflicts within the charter. Fourth, does the proposed amendment interfere with or take away any rights of voters? I think that's obviously a very clear standard. We don't want our Constitution to remove the rights of voters. Fifth, is the proposed amendment consistent with state law? I already told you it must be, so that's an easy. It's a yes or no question. Yes or no? And then finally, number 6, is the proposed amendment necessary to accomplish its intended objective? Here again, many things might be achieved by ordinance or by city policy and don't necessarily require a charter amendment. So that's a balancing question. Is this truly a constitutional issue, or is it something that could be handled in a different way? And thankfully, I have reached the end of talking at you. I know you're all tired. I want to thank you for your attention. I hope that you find the member handbook helpful and informative. I think it's a great resource. I encourage you to submit any questions as you're looking through it. We want to make sure we maintain it going forward. If there are questions, Mr. Chair, I'd stand for them, but I know it's late.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I don't see any questions at this time. There is a lot of information in the packet. I think the value of the packet is that it's in one place. And Mr. Carl kind of went quickly over a lot of the charter stuff. He didn't go over the redistricting stuff, information.
Which is also fun.
Which is also fun, but it's something that when you have time, take a look at. And so without further discussion, I'm going to ask the clerk to file that presentation. The next item on the agenda is public comment, but before I get to it, I understand from the clerk that it was not clear if I actually referred the mayor's letter to the Amendment Review Committee, so without objection, I'm going to refer that to the Amendment Review Committee. And then the final issue is public comment. And if you're here to submit public comment, please either sign up or hope you've signed up. And Mr. Clerk, has anybody signed up for public comment?
Chair Ginder, there are no members of the public signed up at this time.
And is there anyone here that would like to do public comment? No. I don't see anyone. With that, we've concluded all of our business to come before the Charter Commission, and without objection, we stand adjourned. Thank you.